What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're going to be ranking every single gun in Warzone 2 from the absolute best down to the absolute worst, and what is meta, what is not. Guns pretty much you guys should and should not be using here within the game. If you haven't enjoyed today's video, make sure you give it a like, subscribe, those notifications turned on, and let's hop into this. All right, so let's get into this here. You guys can be able to see that we have the tiers here of absolute meta, top tier, competitive, average, below average, niche, and then garbage. What I've gone ahead and done is I've organized all these guns out in here. Some of them were a little bit, messed up. So we've got, of course, our SMGs, our ARs, LMGs, all that sort of good stuff here. So we're gonna go through each by category, and we're gonna put these in here to the absolute, meta tiers, absolute, top tier, etc., etc. So we'll go through and do all that right now. All right, so starting things off, we have the MX9 as our very first gun here, and so I'm actually gonna go and put this thing up in here in the absolute meta, because this thing in Warzone is actually incredibly good in comparison to multiplayer. The actual multiplayer version of this gun is really not all that great, but Warzone, this thing is top tier, and a lot of people are running this as like your sniper support, stuff like that. Like, this is a really, really good gun. Next up, we have the Vel 46. I'll put this thing here in about like competitive. I don't believe this to be like a top tier gun, but I do think that it does have some like sort of competitive capabilities here within Warzone 2. Next up is the Vaznev 9K. This thing, what I'm going to go and do is I'm going to put this up in here in top tier, because this is a really solid gun, but I don't believe it is like the most absolute god tier meta gun out there. It is still incredibly good, and you'll be solid off ground loot, or regardless if you put this on your loadout, you can have some really good builds with it, but I don't believe it is going to be a super ungodly top tier gun. However, though, this next one, the Lockman sub, this is definitely going to go up in top tier meta, because when I made my #1 meta video, I was running the Lockman sub along with the RPK, and it's like that was an ungodly combo there. As long as you can actually manage to get your loadout, which sometimes can be a little bit difficult, the Lockman sub is incredible. Now the Hurricane, though, I'm gonna go put this in the same category as the Vel 46. It's just in the competitive category. It's not necessarily the greatest, but it can be a pretty decent option for something like sniper support and so on and so forth. Next up after that, the mini back. I'll go put this actually in top tier, because the mini back is surprisingly good in Warzone. I'm not gonna lie. I've seen some people get absolutely deleted with it. It's pretty solid when you pick it up. If you get it, out of your loadout, it's gonna be really solid. So you really can't complain about that, as it's actually pretty genuinely good. Next up for the SMGs is the PDSW, pretty much AKA the P90. This is gonna go in the competitive category, because it's not like really a top tier gun, but it's still definitely usable. There's not a lot of guns that are like literally garbage in this game, but the PDSW is definitely not like super deserving of a top tier slot, but it's definitely pretty solid. Next up, the Bass P. I'm going to go ahead and put this also in the competitive category, because I don't believe it, overtakes, the MX9, Lockman sub, Vaznev 9K, or even the mini back. Though the mini back, this is probably maybe a little bit of a generous placement for this gun. But even then, I do believe that this probably falls within the competitive side. Maybe after a patch update or something else like that, it could probably move up. But overall, right now, the Bass P definitely should probably stay in the competitive category. The Fennec, though, however, this next gun, this is 110% absolute meta. This is ungodly good. This thing literally deletes people at that close range. So if you're running this as a close range, or even a little bit tad outside that close range, you're going to destroy people, and it's going to be kind of ridiculous. So definitely go and run the Fennec 45 on your setups. That, the Lockman sub, MX9, all incredible SMGs. After that, though, the Caslav 74U, I'm actually also going to go put this up in the absolute meta, because when you use any of these, SMGs up here, you're really just going to be dominating that close range space, and that looks like that is going to be the end of our sort of SMGs. This is where these rank so far. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think about the SMGs, but now let's move on to the assault rifles. First up, we're going to go take a look at the M4, one of the tried and true favorites here in Warzone. I think the M4 is actually pretty good, but I don't believe it's going to be the best thing out there. So I'll put this up in the top tier slot. I've had some better success with actually using the M4. It's my most kills I've ever dropped, but I do believe some of the recoil patterns and everything else like that kind of make this thing a little bit less top tier meta, but really just less absolute meta, I should say, but definitely a top tier gun that's still very good to use. However, though, the gun after it, the TAC 56, the second unlock in the assault rifle category, this thing definitely deserves top tier meta, because you can make this thing an absolute laser beam at those medium to longer ranges with the correct build on it. It's definitely got a lot more manageable recoil pattern than the M4, and the damage profile is really solid. So 100% use the TAC 56 if you're going for an assault rifle. You know what, I'm not gonna lie, guys, this is probably gonna be the first gun we put down in here into like niche or absolute garbage, because I genuinely believe that the M16 is like niche or kind of garbage. Like, you ain't seen nobody run this thing. So I'll put this down here in niche, because because I really don't see people run it, and I don't want to call it literal garbage, but it's really not that great. I mean, the M16 is like, if you're really trying to struggle and like you want to have fun struggling, use the M16. But that's definitely not the case though for the Lockman 5.56, which we're also going to slide up in here with the TAC 56. This gun is also another top tier gun you can build out to have pretty much zero recoil. I actually made a top 5 zero recoil loadouts, and the Lockman 5.56 and the TAC 56 were both in there, so they're really solid. Also, now the STB is another gun I'll actually throw up in here into the absolute meta category, just because it's actually incredibly good. Like, you can run this as like a sniper sport, you can run this as a primary AR, you can use it kind of as like a mid-range, not even for super long range. So it's got its definite place. I don't believe it's as accurate as these other two, but really, got a lot of great stopping power. Now, this is the new gun in here, the M13B. This thing actually just got added into the game. So the M13B, I'll actually put this up in here in sort of like the competitive category, because we haven't had as much time to be able to utilize this gun yet. The M13, it's pretty solid, but I'm not going to say it's like super top tier or meta. I'll definitely say that it's definitely competitive and you can use it, but it's not like it's ungodly good by any means. Down here for the cast off 5.45, I'm putting this thing down here in below average. It's not definitely, as bad as the M16, but it's not really that great. It's probably the worst cast off in the game right now, and you guys probably don't want to be using it. It's kind of a shame you have to use that in order to be able to get the 74U, because the 74U is really good. The 7.62 is really good. Actually, well, speaking of the 7.62, we'll actually throw this up in here in the top tier category, just because this gun's got really great stopping power, but the recoil on this thing can be a little bit much. We still have to figure out a way to be able to fine tune this thing to make it a little bit better, but otherwise, the cast off 7.62 is really solid, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily like super absolute meta. That basically concludes our sort of assault rifles here. You guys have to let me know what you guys think about this placement. Now we have the ARs and SMGs lined up. Now let's get into some of the battle rifles here within Modern Warfare 2, or Warzone 2, I should say. There's only about 4 or 5 of these things right here. So first thing is going to be the Lockman 7.62. I'm going to go put this up in the competitive category, just because I really don't see people using the Lockman 7.62. Like, it's not bad by any means, but it's really just not all that much used, and it's pretty heavy hitting, as are all the battle rifles, but it's probably the least used. That and the F-TAC Recon, which we'll actually go throw up in here, and probably like the average category, is probably being one of the more less used guns that are actually in the game. So I would throw them up there because they're really hard hitting, and they're probably got their sort of like specific use, but they're probably going to require a patch update to maybe be a little bit better than they are right now. And same, I'll go throw in the SO14 up in here, because I'll throw this down in below average, because this thing is never used. I don't ever see this. It is not ever picked up. But the one thing out of the battle rifles that is incredibly good is I'm going to go throw in the TAC V up here, because this is a fully automatic, pretty much like your SCAR H. You kind of think of the TAC 56 as like your SCAR L, pretty much SCAR light versus SCAR heavy. And this thing hits incredibly hard. It'll delete people, delete like a whole squad in a mag, and it's kind of ridiculous. You just have to not use it at like super long range, that medium-ish range, and this thing will fry through people's plates, armor, etc. Like, you'll be down on a lot of people. But there's only 4 of these things in here, so this is gonna be my placement for the the battle rifles. Now let's move on to some of the shotguns, as that's kind of a little bit of an interesting one. So first one up here is a Lockwood 300. I'll actually put this pretty much in like the average category. It can be fun to use, but it's pretty much like an Olympia. If you guys know what that gun is, I mean, you shoot it, then you have to actually pretty much break open the gun and put some more shells into it. So it's not necessarily the greatest, but it's not like terrible. It's got great stopping power for what it is, but it's not great when you come against multiple people, as some of these other shotguns are a little bit better for that. The Expedite 12, I'll also put this in the average category. It's nothing special. It can be pretty solid at like, super piss close range, but other than that, it's not really necessarily the greatest. After that, though, the Bryson 890, I'm going to actually put this up in the competitive category here, because the Bryson will kind of catch you a little bit off guard. It's got that magazine reload to it. I mean, it's actually not a bad shotgun. Like, genuinely speaking, it's pretty solid. So I really can't, dog on it too much. And then also the other Bryson, the 800, I'm going to put this up in the competitive category as well, because this and the 890 will catch you a little off guard with their one-shot kill potential. It's a little bit weird in how like effective it can possibly be. Sometimes you get the one shot and you take someone down, sometimes you don't. A little bit hit or miss, but it's definitely competitive, as like you can walk into a room and literally just get deleted, blasted away. All right, guys, now we're gonna move on to some of the LMGs here within the game. There's about 6 of these things, and Spoiler alert, there are some of these things that are really, really good. First up, we have the Socken MG38. We're actually going to put this in relatively like the average category. A lot of the LMGs are very hard hitting, can be very slow, but the Socken MG38 is probably one of the lesser good ones out of the bunch. It's really nothing special. It can be pretty good, but I just really don't see people using it all that much. Much like the HCR50, I'll put this up in the competitive category because the HCR is pretty much the variant of the STB556, and then of course the MX9, both of which are also in the top tier absolute meta category. But I would definitely say that this thing is competitive, but it's not nearly going to be used as much just due to having a little bit of a slower, overall movement speed and everything else like that. And there being some other better options for more or less a primary. The Icarus here is our next gun up, and we're going to throw this in like the average category because I don't believe it to be particularly good. I don't really ever see people use the 556 Icarus. It's not bad. It's the version of the M4, the LMG version of the M4. So the M4 itself is a lot better up in the top tier category, but I don't believe this gun to be necessarily all that great. However, though, the RAL, this thing can definitely go up in the top tier category. This gun, it's incredibly hard. I actually put this in my top 5 zero recoil loadouts because you can make this thing literally have zero recoil. I mean, or pretty much as close as you possibly can in Warzone 2. It's not like Warzone 1 where your guns would literally be like laser beams, but this is as close as a laser beam as you can get for like an LMG. The gun after it though, also, this is my other favorite LMG, or my favorite LMG, the RPK. This thing hits incredibly hard, incredibly good. Definitely probably between this and the RAL, the best LMGs in the category. They're incredibly good. As far as the last one here, the RAF-H, I'm just going to put this down in the regular average category. It's not really used that much. Not bad. You're not going to be like super down bad if you try to use it, but it's not necessarily the greatest thing, as there's a lot of other better primary options up in here. All right, now moving on to some of our like marksman-ish rifles. The first one up in here is actually going to be the EBR-14. We're going to put this up in the top tier category because the EBR-14 is surprisingly really good. It's got a great 1 to 2 shot-ish potential. If people don't have plates, you can take someone down in a one-shot headshot, but getting a one-shot headshot in Warzone 2 is very unlikely, just because if someone's got 3 plates, it's pretty much not going to happen unless it's maybe a tad bit of a glitch or they update the game. But otherwise, the EBR-14 is going to be up there in top tier. You can hit people down like 2 to 3 shots. Recoil is pretty manageable, but it's not like you can just spam this thing. It's not like the DMR-14 from Warzone 1, all the different nerfs and everything. It's not like that. If it was like that, if that was the case, this thing going to be like definitely the best gun in the entire game. Otherwise, it's just top tier. Next up, the SPR-208. This thing's actually really good. Actually, I kind of take that back. The SPR-208 is not necessarily like really good. I'll just put it like in the average category. I was actually mistaking it for another gun. I was just thinking about something else for a second, but it's still pretty decent, but it's not necessarily the greatest. And also, much like the Mark II, this is going to be kind of in like the below average category. I don't really think this gun is all that great. It's not really contending for any meta position in any capacity. I don't ever see the Mark II getting used. It's really just a subpar gun. Next up is going to be the LM-S. This gun is actually going to be pretty much more in like the niche side. I really don't think this thing is good. It's like kind of very average, below average. No one's really going to be using this, so I wouldn't definitely say for you guys to go in and like actually ever try this thing out. Not really all that useful. Kind of the same thing here for the SAB-50. I don't believe it's going to be all that great. I'll put it like in the average category because it's not bad, but it's definitely not like the greatest. And pretty much like the SAB-50, the TAC-M, this is going to be another one of those guns that's really just kind of a little bit okay. It's like average. It's not terrible, but it's definitely not the greatest. So we're going to leave that in the average category, and that should finish off our marksman sort of rifles category. Now we'll move on to the snipers, which we have 4 of them down here before we get into some of the pistols and all the other shenanigans in this game. So actually, we do happen to have the Victus XMR, but we'll actually move through here pretty quickly. So the MCR300, this is actually not a bad sniper. And when I say not a bad sniper, I probably should have rephrased that. Like, this thing is actually like top tier, like even by like people's like ranking of the stats, like is a top tier gun. So I probably should have definitely rephrased that a little bit, but it's actually really good. So definitely use the MCR300. This thing is a really solid gun. It hits super hard. After the MCR300 is going to be the Signal 50. This is just going to more or less be kind of like an average sniper rifle. It's not terrible, but it's just like viable. It's decent. Like, you can use it. It's not like the end of the world if you happen to use it, but I don't particularly recommend it all that much. After that though, for something else that's probably a little bit better than the Signal 50 is the LAB330. We'll put this up in the competitive niche because it is definitely better than the Signal 50, but it's not like it's incredibly good. It's still worth like leveling up and using, but I don't particularly recommend it over like something like the MCR 300, which is definitely probably like the best sniper right now, maybe short of like the Victus XMR, which I think has a potential like one hit kill potential, but something that goes actually right in between these two guns, the LAB 330 and the MCR 300, is going to be the SP-X80. This is a really solid sniper rifle. I wouldn't necessarily put it in like absolute meta, as that one definitely kind of takes the cake up there, but it's still really good. So between these two right here, you really can't go wrong, as they're like pretty solid. And then we're also going to throw up the Victus XMR in here because it does have that one-shot headshot potential, which is a little bit odd. You have to build it a certain way, but it can actually be pretty solid. There's a lot of like weird things in Warzone 2 with like certain rounds and ammunition types and so on and so forth. So I definitely say that you guys can like use pretty much these three with confidence that they're going to be really solid as like your long range option. But overall, this is more or less going to be like the sniper category placement. Listen, fellas, I'm going to do it right here, right now. We're just going to go fill out this bottom category real fast. The riot shield, garbage. If you use the riot shield in Warzone, garbage. You are a garbage ass player. Like, don't ever use the riot shield in Warzone. I'm throwing the knife down in here as well. I mean, listen, ain't nobody using that. This is for like, this is them kids that run around that really just piss you off, that annoy you. Garbage players, garbage things to use. Don't ever use them. Now, this next one's probably going to surprise some people, but for the pistol category, the P890, when you run this thing, absolute meta. Like, this is a little bit crazy. People be running this thing with dual wield, and like it literally fries at close range. Like it doesn't make much sense. Genuinely does not make much sense how good it actually is, but the P890 is really solid. So definitely go ahead and run the P890 like dual wield, and you'll be just frying through people's armor. After that though, I'm just gonna go down here. We're gonna just take a look at the Deagle, pretty much the .50. I just call it the Desert Eagle, just because that's pretty much what it is. I'm gonna throw this in the average category. It's not like particularly good, it's not particularly bad. It hits pretty hard, but I mean, it does have its kind of downfall, the magazine size and the recoil and everything else like that. So it's not necessarily like terrible, but it's not necessarily like the greatest thing out there. As far as something that's even a little bit below that, we'll throw it in the X12 here, as that's not something we particularly like. You get this as more or less like your drop-in pistol. It's below average. It's okay. It's not going to be all that great, but it can suffice if you happen to run it. This next one, the Basilisk, aka like the Magnums, is a little bit tricky because by itself, the Magnum is not really all that great. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this up in here in like the competitive tier, just because when you run this as dual wields with a snake shot ammunition at close range, you are like an actual force to be reckoned with. It's a little bit nuts, kind of disgusting. So I'd recommend for you guys to run the Basilisk as the snake shot dual wields with a very specific build. It can be good, but outside of that, it's really not going to be all that great. So I don't really recommend it. But also what's actually also going to be pretty solid is running the X13 Auto. This is going to be the first time we actually have to have an extended category here, but the X13 Auto is pretty good. Also, you run pistols like a dual wielder and like an extended mag, and that can be pretty good. But otherwise, that is going to be where our pistols end up here for this thing. And pretty much lastly, we're just left with some of the launchers. I'll kind of just throw these in here. I'll say that like you can run the RPG as like I'll just throw the RPG in competitive just because it's an RPG and you can launch at whatever, cars, people, helicopters, like you can shoot it at whatever, and it can be useful. It's a little bit bummy to use, but overall the rest of these things, I mean, I don't really find much use for like a Pila, a Strela P, a Joker. Like I'm not running none of this, like these trash ass weapons in down here. Like this is like random shenanigans you don't use. This will be like my full sort of like setup here. You guys gonna have to let me know what you think down in the comment section below about this placement. I think I've done everything pretty accurately, but if you guys haven't enjoyed this video, want to see more like this as the meta gets updated, be sure to give it a like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and I'll see you guys all later. Just run up with Cap, don't be Randy, and I'm out. Peace.